Abraham Lincoln saved the United States, but before he became a monument, before his face was carved into stone, before history called him a hero, he was a grieving father sitting alone inside the White House. His child was dead. His armies were failing. Thousands of soldiers were being slaughtered under his command. And across the country, millions of people blamed him. But what if Lincoln's greatest enemy was not the Confederate Army? What if it was the darkness inside his own mind? In 1862, the president reached a point where almost everything he loved appeared to be collapsing. His family, his reputation, his faith, and possibly the nation itself. These were the darkest days of Abraham Lincoln, and the decisions he made inside that darkness would change America forever. The White House was not peaceful during the Civil War. Outside its doors stood politicians demanding victories, families searching for missing sons, military officers carrying casualty reports, and strangers begging the president for favors. Every letter seemed to carry another tragedy. Every telegram could announce another disaster, and every battlefield defeat raised the same terrifying question: could the United States survive? Lincoln was already familiar with sorrow. Long before becoming president, he had experienced periods of profound melancholy. Friends knew him as a man capable of telling hilarious stories one moment and disappearing into silence the next. But nothing prepared him for what happened inside the White House on February 20th, 1862. On that day, Lincoln's 11-year-old son Willie died after becoming seriously ill. His death devastated both Abraham and Mary Lincoln and cast a shadow over the remaining years of the presidency. Willie was intelligent, curious, and deeply loved. While a civil war raged beyond the White House gates, Lincoln had found comfort in his children. Then, suddenly, one of them was gone. Imagine the impossible contradiction. Lincoln was expected to comfort a wounded nation, while he could barely comfort his own family. Willie's death did not happen in some distant family home. It happened inside the White House, the same building where generals discussed military campaigns, where officials calculated losses, and where Lincoln was expected to appear calm, rational, and unbreakable. But behind closed doors, the president was not a symbol. He was a father. Mary Lincoln was emotionally shattered. Her grief became so intense that she struggled to return to the room where Willie had died. Lincoln had no time to escape his pain. The war continued. Documents still required signatures. Generals still demanded instructions, and casualty lists kept growing. Each name on those lists represented someone else's Willie, someone else's empty chair, someone else's family receiving the worst news imaginable. Lincoln did not simply mourn his son. He carried the knowledge that his decisions were sending thousands of other sons toward death. Lincoln needed a commander who could destroy the Confederate Army. Instead, he found hesitation, rivalry, defeat, and confusion. General George McClellan built an enormous army, but repeatedly frustrated Lincoln with his caution. When Lincoln wanted movement, McClellan saw danger. When Lincoln demanded action, McClellan requested more men. The president was trapped. If he removed the general, he risked destabilizing the army. If he kept him, the war might continue without a decisive victory. Then came more disaster. In August 1862, Union forces suffered a crushing defeat at the Second Battle of Bull Run and retreated toward Washington. The enemy was no longer a distant threat. Confederate forces appeared capable of bringing the war into the North. Washington prepared for danger, and the president faced an increasingly hostile public. What happens when an entire country begins losing faith in its leader? At the exact moment that leader begins questioning himself. Inside this political and military crisis, Lincoln was preparing something explosive, a document that could transform the meaning of the war, the Emancipation Proclamation. Until then, the Union's central declared purpose had been preserving the country, but slavery stood at the heart of the conflict. Lincoln had reached a turning point. Destroying slavery in the rebellious states could become both a moral objective and a weapon of war. Yet the decision was filled with danger. Some Northerners would refuse to support a war for emancipation. Border states might turn against the Union. Political allies could abandon him. Foreign governments were watching. Even Lincoln's cabinet was divided over the timing. Lincoln presented a draft to his cabinet on July 22, 1862. Some supported immediate publication, while Secretary of State William Seward advised waiting for a Union military success so the proclamation would not appear to be an act of desperation. So Lincoln waited. Think about that moment. a president holding one of the most consequential documents in American history, unable to release it because his armies could not give him the victory he needed. Then, on September 17, 1862, Union and Confederate armies collided near Antietam Creek. By the end of the day, more than 23,000 soldiers had been killed, wounded, or reported missing, making Antietam the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. The Confederate advance was stopped, giving Lincoln the opportunity he had been waiting for. 5 days later, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. But this was not the end of his darkness. It was only another turn deeper into it. In December 1862, Union soldiers advanced at Fredericksburg, Virginia. Again and again, they charged powerful Confederate positions. Again and again, they were cut down. The assault became a catastrophe. The battlefield filled with wounded men, many trapped in freezing conditions. And although Lincoln was miles away, the responsibility traveled directly back to the White House. He had chosen the commanders. He had demanded progress. The war was being fought in his name. After Fredericksburg, Lincoln addressed the Army of the Potomac in a message dated December 22, 1862. He acknowledged that the troops had attempted the impossible and had endured enormous sacrifice. But words could not reverse the charge. They could not bring back the dead. They could not erase the image of soldiers lying before an enemy position they had almost no chance of taking. And now Lincoln faced a horrifying possibility. What if courage was not enough? What if the Union could sacrifice everything and still lose? The popular image of presidential power is an illusion. Power does not remove fear. It concentrates it. Lincoln could ask his cabinet for advice. He could replace generals. He could study maps and read reports. But when the final decision arrived, it belonged to him alone. By late 1862, criticism came from almost every direction. Some accused him of conducting the war badly. Others attacked emancipation. Others condemned his administration's arrests and wartime restrictions. A private letter sent to Lincoln after the 1862 elections warned that citizens were dissatisfied with the conduct of the war, the actions of government officers, arrests, and the Emancipation Proclamation. To abolitionists, Lincoln sometimes moved too slowly. To conservatives, he moved too far. To generals, he interfered too much. To grieving families, he had not ended the war quickly enough. There was almost no decision he could make without creating another enemy. Then came 1863, and another blow. At Chancellorsville, the Union Army suffered a humiliating defeat, despite possessing a numerical advantage. Once again, a new commander had failed. Once again, the road to victory disappeared. The nation did not know how the war would end. Lincoln did not know either. That is the part monuments hide. History remembers the outcome. Lincoln had to make decisions before the outcome existed. Here is the unexpected truth about Lincoln's darkest period. The darkness did not disappear before he acted. He did not wait until he felt fearless. He did not receive proof that the Union would win. He did not suddenly become free from grief. Instead, he moved forward while still carrying it. On January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, expanding the Union war effort into a struggle against slavery in the rebellious states and opening the way for black men to serve in the United States military. But the proclamation was not issued from a position of complete safety. It emerged from uncertainty. Lincoln understood that the measure could increase opposition to him. He understood that it could change the country permanently, and he understood there was no easy road back. But the greatest transformation was not only political, it was personal. Lincoln's suffering had placed him face to face with the cost of every decision. The death of his child did not make the deaths of soldiers less painful to him. It made them more real. His melancholy did not automatically make him weak. It may have deepened his ability to recognize grief in others. And his uncertainty did not stop him from acting. It forced him to understand the weight of action. In July 1863, victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg finally shifted momentum toward the Union. 4 months later, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg. He was not there to celebrate war. He was there to stand near the graves it had created. On November 19, 1863, he delivered a remarkably brief address honoring the dead and connecting their sacrifice to democracy, equality, and a new birth of freedom. The speech lasted only minutes, but it gave the suffering a purpose larger than military victory. The war was no longer simply about putting the country back together as it had been. It was about creating a country closer to what it had always claimed to be. Today, Abraham Lincoln sits inside a marble temple. His expression is calm. His body is still. He looks permanent. But the real Lincoln was never made of stone. He was exhausted. He doubted. He grieved. He made mistakes. He faced criticism from people who believed he was destroying the country and from others who believed he was not changing it fast enough. He watched the war consume lives faster than the nation could bury them. And inside the White House, he carried the memory of a child who would never come home. That is what makes his story powerful. Not that he escaped darkness, but that he continued to make difficult choices while surrounded by it. Perhaps courage is not the absence of despair. Perhaps courage is what remains when hope has been wounded, but responsibility still calls. Lincoln's darkest days did not produce a perfect man. They revealed a burdened one. A man who could not see the ending, but understood that history would judge what he chose to do before the light returned. And in the end, the president who struggled to hold himself together held the nation together. The strongest leaders are not those who never enter darkness. They are those who refuse to let darkness make their decisions.